The delts are one of the most important body parts for the upper body. It's one body part that can literally be seen in every angle, in every pose, and with the delts having 3 heads, the front, the side, and the rear, neglecting any one of those areas can lead to obvious gaps in your physique. And while some other muscle groups can be trained in as little as 1 to 2 movements, think the chest with presses and flies, the delts can be trained with an enormous amount of exercises and tons of variations, including presses, front raises, side laterals, rear laterals, face pulls, and various row variations. Needless to say, it can get complicated pretty quick. But when it comes to the best and worst exercises for the delts, there are a few that are much more productive than others and light years ahead. And we're going to break that down right now. And in order to do so, we're going to break up the delts into each head and focus on the best movement for each of them. Now, starting with the front delts, you have a muscle group that's worked in virtually all pressing exercises. While the front delts work in isolation to raise the arms in the front of the body, they're trained heavily in all compound pressing exercises, whether that's chest pressing on a horizontal or an incline press, or the number one front delt exercise we're going to talk about today, the shoulder press. This can be done with a barbell or a dumbbell, both of which have their own pros and cons, but this exercise is traditionally done completely upright to target the front delts specifically. Personally, I think this is a very useful exercise, but if I'm picking number 1 for front delts, I'm actually going to go with the high incline barbell press. This exercise is very similar to the incline barbell press you would train for the chest, but the steeper incline offers 2 distinct advantages in my opinion. Number 1, the high incline hammers the front delts just as hard as a normal incline position, but it also nails the upper shelf of the pecs. This part of the muscle that we refer to in the bodybuilding world as the pec delt tie-in. So now we're using a very productive delt exercise, but we're also getting the advantage of additional work to the upper pecs. And the second major advantage is many people have injuries. Many people have tight traps or just have general shoulder mobility issues. And that can make a standard overhead press uncomfortable or in some cases just completely unrealistic for people. And in this case, I find the high incline barbell press to be a game changer for many people. Now, it's important to note that I've said many times, most people get plenty of front delt work indirectly from training the chest. So it's important to understand that you might not need as much front delt work as you require for the side or the rear delts. And you should assess this when setting up your training. With that said, that's also why I'm going to rank front delt raises as my worst exercise for the front delts. If you're already doing plenty of chest training and then adding in more shoulder pressing, doing additional front raises might be overkill. While they're not a bad exercise by any means, they just might actually be obsolete for most people. And next, we're going to move on to the side delts. This head of the muscle tends to be the most neglected out of all 3 for most people, with presses nailing the front delts and pulling hitting the rear delts very hard. Side delts tend to take a lot of smaller, indirect stimulus for most of these compound movements, but almost none of them hit them directly very hard. In that case, side delt lateral raises become very important for full shoulder development. You can do this with a standard standing lateral raise, machine lateral raise, or cable lateral raise, but my personal choice would be the braced incline dumbbell lateral raise. Think about doing a normal lateral raise as you would standing, but lean forward onto a high incline bench and perform the lift with your chest against the pad. This position will force you to take your hips and your lower back out of the equation, making for a much stricter movement for the side delts. I find that most people don't like lateral raises because they feel that they don't get a lot out of the movement, but many people also use a ton of momentum on this lift. If you have trouble feeling those side delts, try performing the movement with this technique and see how much less weight you could actually handle. That's because now the side delts are actually doing the majority of the work, not the lower back or the supporting muscles. Now, moving on to rear delts. This is a muscle group that's either often neglected or just trained poorly. Rows and pull downs hit the rear delts very hard, but the rear delts can take a ton of work. It's a muscle group that very rarely stays sore for very long, and it's one that you almost never see any performance variance in. If they're a muscle that needs extra attention from you, do not be afraid to beat them up. Now, this is a body part that you have to perform lateral raises in the bent over position, or you can use variations of face pulls to hit the rear delts directly. With that being said, the rear delts are a small muscle group surrounded by much larger muscles of the middle and the upper back. So light weights with perfect form are key here. Simply doing braced incline dumbbell lateral raises on a lower incline can also work wonders for the rear delts for the same reason as the side delts. But again, the key is picking the right weight. You need to make sure that you're using the rear delts and not the middle or the upper back. And in addition to this exercise, a strong case can be made for the reverse pec deck, as the chest supported pad gives you the same benefit. But if your gym doesn't have one, just grab an incline bench. And like anything today, you can get very complicated with your training and you could use very fancy exercises. But in my opinion, for the delts, the basics work. The problem is, most people use too much weight, use too much momentum, and ultimately use the wrong muscles on these exercises. And my advice is, go back to the basics. Apply these little tweaks and techniques and focus on the right muscles performing the lifts. Get the most out of those basic bread and butter exercises. And if you're looking to incorporate old school bodybuilding methods to reach your physique goals, all my old school programs are down below in the description. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.